Hello wonderful people, and welcome back to my underrated builds series. The build making landscape has widened since the last DLC, with all the changes they gave us, like changing the scaling on weapons or buffing rings. So there is so many builds that you can actually do now that weren't possible before the DLC. So today we have a lot of badass builds to show that weren't possible before. So let's begin, my friends. Build number 1. The Ringed Knight. The Ringed Knights are enemies in the Ringed City. I know, it's obvious. They are very strong. They will kill ya. So why not cosplay them? But I know this is not just cosplaying them, because cosplaying them is not enough to be an underrated build. Actually, this build is centered around the shields they use, and their weapons too, and their armor, everything about them. But I really like their shields. Their shields are very unique. The Dragon Head Great Shield and the Dragon Shield. Let's first talk about the weapon, the Ringed Knight Straight Sword, which again you find in the Ringed City. It's a straight sword that they use, and it's mainly a strength weapon, although it does have scaling to dexterity, so it's B in strength and D in dexterity. So in this build we're using a quality build, which has both dexterity and strength. The reason for going quality build is we want the most damage out of our straight sword, since this is the weapon that we're going to be relying on. But if you have this weapon as a side thing, you can definitely use it on a strength build. When it comes to damage, the Ringed Knight Straight Sword is on the lower side of things. There are other straight swords that do more damage. Moreover, it cannot be buffed nor infused, so you're stuck with it and you cannot do any enhancements to it. But it has a very good weapon art. I would consider it one of the most badass weapon arts in the game, but it does use focus points. So you do need attunements, and that's why we're using the mercenary class on this build, so we can have some focus points to use. The weapons art light attacks are a series of slashes with this fire beam thing, which is so cool. I really love it. And every attack you do, so the first 2 attacks are actually 4 hits, and the third one is a final crushing blow that does humongous damage, but it's very slow, so don't expect to hit a lot of people with that thing. But since it does multiple hits, this weapon is a very good candidate for the Pontus Right Eye Ring. And actually I missed that when I was doing the build, but that means I can do it on another build and try that out in another video. The weapon art's heavy attack is a long distance thrust that will reach people until the end of the earth. This is arguably the best attack on this weapon. It's just insane the distance you cover with it. You can catch people from afar, and it does a lot of damage, and you can pair the Lee Ring with it since it's a thrust attack. And then you can follow up that with another crushing blow that does also a lot of damage. Now all these attacks that you're doing with your weapon art do have hyper armor, so the more poise you have, the more you can trade hits with them. However, what I noticed, and it's clear, that the heavy attacks have more hyper armor than the light attacks, and that's speaking about the weapon arts. When it comes to this weapon, when you want to master it, you need to know how to use, when to use the normal moveset and when to use the weapon arts, and mix these two to have this amazing weapon. If you use one or the other exclusively, you're not using the full potential of this weapon. So I think this Ringed Knight Straight Sword is a very, very unique weapon in this game, and I really love it. Now, in order to make the Ringed Knight Straight Sword even better, we will be using the Dragon Shields that I talked about. However, we will be using one or the other, but I'll be showcasing both to show the advantages that comes with each one of them. Let's look at the Dragon Head Great Shield first. This one weighs 18 units, a very, very obvious disadvantage. This is too much, I would say. Another disadvantage it has is that it requires 15 in Faith, which is annoying when you do a melee build. It's annoying to add points to Faith. Another thing is it has 64 stability, which is not very good for its weight nor as a great shield. You can actually get 64 with a normal medium shield. I think the best one, like the Silver Knight or the Lothric shield, has a similar stability, but it does have 100% defense against physical and 90 against fire, so you can shut down pyromancers with this shield. But with so many bad things going for this shield, there must be a great thing. And yes, there is. When you use this weapon art, you get a ton of poise when using this shield. I mean a ton. You can get any weapon that has no hyper armor and turn it to a weapon that you can actually trade with. I think this opens up so many things that wasn't available before. but the weight and all these things, the bad things that come with this shield, makes it not very desirable. However, I think it's very worth it, and I will be exploring it more with other weapons, because I can use this thing with a straight sword, even it doesn't have to be the Ring Knight straight sword, and I can trade with an ultra great sword and not flinch. I will continue attacking, and with a fast weapon you can deal a ton of damage if you're not getting interrupted. So it opens up a lot of things, and it's really cool, man. The animation, you feel like a badass, and the sound effect when you do in the battlefield between like 2 or 3 people and they stun and they get stunned from it, you feel like a boss. But one big problem I have with it is that it doesn't actually do what the actual Ring Knights do with it. They actually knock you back. Like, it's really awesome. I thought that you can do that in PvP, but you cannot. And also the weapon art actually mentions that sending foes flying with a dragon roar. However, that doesn't happen. I don't know why they mentioned this while it doesn't happen, but hey, I think the buff that you get is actually better than the knockback. So in summary, this shield is equivalent of the buff that you get from the Black Knight Greatsword, one of the best weapons in the game, or the buff that the Great Hammers get, but the extra thing is that you can actually use this buff with any other weapon. So that's the very unique thing about this shield that I think people are still not comprehending. Now let's talk about the Dragon Head shield. Let's talk about the shitty stuff. First of all, it's a shitty shield across the board. Never block with that thing. However, it does weigh 4.5. It makes it more accessible than the other shield. But another big annoying thing is it requires 11 in intelligence and 12 in faith. And again, on a melee build, this can be annoying. However, I think this shield is fantastic. What it basically does is a sweep of fire in front of you. And the catch here is not the damage. Actually, it does like 120 damage when it's fully upgraded, but that's without intelligence and faith. But it's not about the damage, it's about the stun. The stun is what you're looking for. And the startup animation is so fast, it's ridiculous. The startup animation speed is actually what makes or breaks a weapon. And this thing is so fast that you can interrupt heavy weapons with ease. I mean, when you see somebody start their animation or their attack, just use it, you stun them. And when you combine this with a fast weapon like a straight sword, you can do a lot of cool stuff. Like, you can combo in ways that people don't expect, and you can use it to stun so many different ways. I think it's a very, very viable shield because of its speed. That's the thing. It stuns and it's very fast. So this application for this shield is very different from the other one. And what you choose is up to you. And the build here that you're looking at is actually using both, so I didn't cater for each shield alone, so I had one build that used both of them. So you can actually, if you want to use one of them, you can actually do a build that just caters to one of those shields. So yeah, that's all for this build. I think it's pretty unique. I think there's gonna be a lot of variations for it in the future that doesn't rely on the cosplay also. So yeah, that's all for this build. Now let's move to the next one. Build number 2. The one-shot killer. So I went back to revisit the pyromancy spell, Power Within, and see what applications it presents, since I didn't look at it in a long time. And I don't know why nobody's using this spell. It is one of the best spells in the game in my opinion. It might be that it got buffed, I don't know, but it feels that it's longer than before, considerably longer. So it does many things, Power Within. It increases your damage by 20%, all your damage by 20%, and it gives you the best stamina regeneration in the game. So not you're just dealing more damage, you can attack much more to actually use that damage. So it's very, very good spell, and it lasts for 30 seconds. And this build is a dexterity build, and it relies on this spell and the dagger and the blessed weapon faith buff. And of course, the build is focused around countering the health penalty that you're getting from the Power Within. So the problem with Power Within is that you damage yourself and it basically takes out 30% of your HP in the end. However, if you add the Lingering Dragon Crest Ring, which will take the buff from 30 seconds to 42 seconds, it means that you will take less damage per tick. And of course, with all the things that we're going to be using, we're going to offset the damage. The first thing we need is 15 faith, so we can use the blessed weapon buff. It doesn't matter if you use a chime or a talisman, it'll give you the same damage. However, with more faith, it does give you more HP regeneration. With everything stacked together, from the blessed weapon on the dagger, to Power Within, to prolonging their effect with Lingering Dragon Crest +2, with all the HP regeneration to offset the damage on yourself from Power Within. The critical damage on backstabs and riposts are insane in PvP. They are usually a one-shot kill. With a small tiny dagger, you can one-shot people. Now usually you will always one-shot phantoms, but the hosts usually they do survive with one more hit or two more hits that you can get easily with your quick steps and your fast attacks with a dagger. The Hornet Ring of course will enhance the critical damage, so you should use the Hornet Ring since this is a niche build. What we're trying to do is get our critical attacks. However, you're still not useless without the critical attacks because you can still do a respectable amount of damage from a dagger. And since it's a dagger and weighs like nothing, you can wear heavy armor, wear anything basically in the game. I'm wearing here the Exiled armor, which is basically one of the heaviest armors in the game. Mastering quick steps can be really good with this build since you can actually get reliable backstabs with them if you time them right. They're not easy, definitely. This is not Dark Souls 2 or 1 when it comes to backstabs. But the feeling you get from this build, the feeling you get is like you're playing in Dark Souls 1. It feels so satisfying when you one-shot someone. I know people can consider that cheap, but one-shotting somebody with a dagger because of your build and the Power Within is so awesome, man. So awesome. One last note for this build. Don't forget to infuse your dagger with sharp infusion, because it's a dexterity build. I have 60 dexterity on this build, which is too much, you don't need that much. However, I do believe that in the last patch, that going from 60 to 70 dexterity gives you more damage than from 50 to 60 on some weapons. So it might be useful to go 70. 60 I think is not really useful, but with the Prisoner Chain Ring that I'm actually using here, I had so many extra stats that I just, throw them on dexterity. I really don't need more vitality or anything else. The third and final build, the Gang Spanker. The concept of this build is basically the same from the second build. We're using Power Within and everything that comes with it to offset its self-damage. But instead of using a dagger and focusing on critical damage and the Hornet Ring, we're using a strength build with a strength weapon. Exiled Greatsword, which by the way, when the last DLC came out, it was the strongest weapon maybe in the game, but they nerfed it a bit to make it more balanced. And I do think that the Exiled Greatsword is low tier in PvP, no doubt. I think it's low tier despite its enormous damage. I think it's low tier because it's just too slow in 1 versus 1 or against competitive players. However, in invasions, it's a different thing. Usually in invasions, people have phantoms, so they're more overconfident. And the Exiled Greatsword does the job perfectly in this scenario because all you need to do is trade. That's all you need to do and everybody's dead. With the Blessed Weapon buff and Power Within, you get crazy damage around the 800s, like 850, something along those lines. Any phantom that trades with you is basically dead. Anyone. Because, with a strength weapon and with a bit of poise, you can trade fairly reliably. So you can do this against 2-3 people and they're all dead. This thing is really, really good. That's why I call it the Gang Spanker. However, it's still really, really good in PvE. Actually, maybe one of the best builds. And if you have high level build, you can add like Sacred Oath and other buffs that you want and make it even stronger, maybe even Dark Moon Blade, and you can take this really, really high damage. And in PvE, with just one riposte or one backstab against a humanoid boss, and he's done. It's also really good in 2 versus 2 and 3 versus 3 in the arena, because usually people are not paying as much attention since sometimes they're playing against somebody else and you can just backstab them. But you don't have to only use the Exiled Greatsword. The build is around the Power Within and everything that comes with it. You can use other strength weapons. I tried Lido's Great Hammer, although you cannot use Blessed Weapon on that thing. Also Great Club, a mace. There are many other weapons that you can use. You don't have to limit yourself. But the range and the hyper armor and the way it curves, that's what makes this weapon really good against 2 or 3 people. That's why, again, I call it the Gang Spanker. It works perfectly. So yeah, that's all for this build, and I hope you have fun with it. That's all for this video. I know I usually have more than 3 builds in this series. However, I will be uploading more episodes for this series and they will be more frequent, so that's the upside. So thanks for watching everyone, and if you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Farewell.